I've always been obsessed with maps. It's not the neat colored-in maps of countries hanging in classrooms, but the hidden maps, the ones drawn in our blood, etched in our bones, written in languages older than any human tongue. For the past decade, I've traced these genetic rivers that flow through humanity, following DNA like breadcrumbs through time. But one place always stood out as different, more complex than anywhere else on Earth. Here's a land that stands at the very edge of Africa, yet gazes directly at Europe across a narrow strip of water. It listens to the whispers of the Middle East, carried on desert winds, while its southern borders touch the heart of sub-Saharan Africa. For years, I thought I understood it as a crossroads, a place shaped by wave after wave of outsiders, each leaving their mark on the local population. But when I finally started following the map hidden in Moroccan DNA, using the latest advances in ancient genetics, I discovered something that shattered everything I thought I knew. This wasn't a crossroads at all. I had found a bridge in ancient genetic structure connecting not just neighboring regions, but 3 entire continents, built with materials I never expected to find. And to understand this bridge, to really comprehend its impossible architecture, I had to dig deeper than I'd ever dug before. I had to uncover the story of the people who were there before any bridge was ever built, people whose existence would rewrite the entire narrative of human migration. What I found changed everything I thought I knew about human history. To find the true foundation of this genetic bridge, you have to become an archaeologist of time itself. You have to dig past the obvious layers, past the French colonial period, past the Arab conquest, past the Roman legions, past even the first Berber kingdoms that most historians consider the beginning of North African civilization. You have to go back 15,000 years. In 2016, a team of international scientists descended into a cave called Tafarelt. Hidden in the mountains of eastern Morocco, what they pulled from that ancient darkness would revolutionize our understanding of North African origins. These were the bones of Morocco's oldest known inhabitants, the Ibero-Maurusians, a people so mysterious that until recently, we knew them only by their stone tools and shell jewelry. When I first learned about them, I made the same assumption most people do. I figured their DNA would be the starting point, the purely African genetic anchor, from which all later complexity would grow. A blank slate waiting for the influence of outsiders. I couldn't have been more wrong. When scientists finally extracted and sequenced DNA from these 15,000-year-old bones, they found something extraordinary. The Ibero-Maurusians weren't just African, they were profoundly uniquely North African, carrying genetic lineages that barely existed anywhere else on the planet. These people had been genetically isolated not for hundreds of years, not for thousands, but for tens of thousands of years. Dr. Johannes Kraus, one of the lead geneticists on the study, told me something that still gives me chills. When we first saw these results, we had to check them 3 times. This was on gradual genetic drift. This was a population that had been on its own evolutionary journey for longer than we thought possible in such a connected region. They weren't a blank slate waiting for outsiders. They were the foundation stone, itself enchant, distinct, and more isolated than the Aboriginal Australians or the indigenous peoples of the Amazon. So if Morocco's story began with such deep, isolated African roots, how did it become the genetic melting pot we see today? The answer lies in 3 great waves of human migration, each one building another arch of the bridge. But the first wave, the one that would change everything, came from a direction that defied all logic. Picture the Mediterranean Sea 7,000 years ago. The Strait of Gibraltar is still there, still a formidable barrier between continents. Any crossing requires sophisticated boats, navigation skills, and tremendous courage. The people on the African side or isolated Ibero-Maurusians have been hunter-gatherers for millennia. They know their land intimately, but they've never farmed, never domesticated animals beyond the dog. Then, almost overnight, in archaeological terms, everything changes. The first great connection to Morocco wasn't a trickle of influence, it was a demographic tsunami. Around 7,000 years ago, farming arrived in Morocco. But this wasn't just the spread of ideas or technology. This was the movement of entire populations, thousands upon thousands of people. When geneticists analyze ancient remains from this period, they discovered something that still seems impossible. In western Morocco, the population was almost completely replaced. The DNA signature that had remained stable for tens of thousands of years suddenly shifted to nearly 80% European, specifically tracing back to Neolithic farmers from Iberia, modern-day Spain, and Portugal. But here's where the story becomes haunting. What happened to the original inhabitants? Dr. Maria, a population geneticist at the University of Barcelona, spent years trying to answer this question. We're looking at one of the most complete population replacements in human history, she explained to me. In some sites, we go from 100% Ibero-Mauritian DNA to less than 20% in just a few generations. This was on gradual mixing. This was a replacement on a scale that suggests either complete displacement or something even more disturbing. Yet as shocking as this discovery was, it raised an even more puzzling question. If you travel just a few hundred miles east in Morocco to places like the Middle Atlas Mountains, the genetic story is completely different. There, the local populations adopted the tools of farming the crops, the pottery, the domesticated animals, but their DNA remained stubbornly, fiercely North African. Why did one half of the country experience total genetic transformation, while the other built walls where their neighbors had built bridges? The answer, it turns out, lies in geography and something we're only now beginning to understand about ancient human behavior. The western plains of Morocco, with their fertile soil and Mediterranean climate, were perfect for European-style agriculture. The newcomers didn't just farm there, they thrived, their population exploding in ways that overwhelmed the existing inhabitants. But the mountains of the east were different. Here, the European farming package was less successful. The terrain was rougher, the climate harsher. The indigenous people could adopt the useful technologies while maintaining their genetic and cultural independence. They became what geneticists call cultural adopters, rather than demographic replacers. This pattern, this east-west genetic divide, would repeat throughout Moroccan history, creating a complexity that makes the country's DNA unlike anywhere else on Earth. Fast forward 3,000 years, and another great power rises on the Mediterranean horizon. The Phoenicians, those master seafarers from the Levant, modern Lebanon, Syria, and Israel, begin establishing trading posts along the North African coast. Eventually, they build something unprecedented: Carthage, an empire that would challenge Rome itself for control of the Mediterranean world. This should have been the moment when the second arch of Morocco's genetic bridge was built, creating a direct connection to the Middle East. The Phoenicians brought Middle Eastern languages, Middle Eastern gods, Middle Eastern architecture. Their cultural influence was so profound that it lasted for centuries, even after Rome destroyed Carthage in 146 BCE. But when modern scientists began analyzing DNA from Punic burial sites across North Africa, they discovered something that defied all expectations. The genetic signature wasn't Middle Eastern at all. Dr. Luca Pagani, population geneticist who led one of the largest studies of ancient Mediterranean DNA, walked me through the results that left his entire team scratching their heads. We expected to find clear Levantine ancestry, the genetic signature of people from modern Lebanon and Syria. Instead, we found something much more complex. The DNA of these culturally Middle Eastern people was overwhelmingly European, specifically linked to ancient populations from Sardinia and Sicily, with substantial mixing from local North African groups. It was as if the Phoenician expansion had picked up and carried European populations rather than Levantine ones. How do you explain a Middle Eastern empire run by people with European and African DNA? The answer lies in one of the most fascinating chapters of ancient Mediterranean history, one that most textbooks completely ignore. The Phoenicians weren't just traders and colonizers. They were recruiters on a massive scale. As they established colonies across the Mediterranean, they didn't just bring people from the homeland. They gathered populations from every island, every coastline, every strategic location they controlled. By the time they reached North Africa, the people we call Phoenicians were actually a cosmopolitan mix of Mediterranean populations, united by culture and commerce rather than genetics. They were the world's first truly international civilization, Middle Eastern in culture, European and African in genetics, global in outlook. But this cultural versus genetic mismatch created something unprecedented in Morocco. For the first time in human history, you had a population that could be simultaneously Middle Eastern, European, and African. It was an identity that existed in 3 dimensions at once. This Phoenician legacy explains something crucial about modern Moroccan genetics. When scientists look for Middle Eastern ancestry in Morocco, they don't find the direct Levantine signatures they expect. Instead, they find this complex Mediterranean blend, European mixed with North African, united by Middle Eastern cultural practices that left no genetic trace. It's a ghost empire, built by people whose blood told one story while their culture told another entirely. The third arch of Morocco's genetic bridge connects it to its own continent. But this story is perhaps the most complex of all. For decades, scientists assumed that any sub-Saharan African DNA found in North Africa was a tragic legacy of the trans-Saharan slave trade. Indeed, Genetic evidence confirms that this horrific practice left deep scars in the Moroccan gene pool. But in 2018, a discovery in southern Morocco changed everything we thought we knew about African connections. Dr. Abdelil Bouzouguer, Morocco's leading prehistoric archaeologist, was excavating a site called Tagat Hadouche when his team uncovered human remains that were far older than anything they expected to find. When the DNA results came back, they revealed sub-Saharan African lineages that predated the Islamic conquest, predated Carthage, predated even the arrival of European farmers. These lineages were ancient, so ancient that they reached back to a time when the Sahara Desert didn't exist. Between 11,000 and 5,000 years ago, during what scientists call the African humid period, the Sahara wasn't a barrier, it was a highway. Instead of endless sand dunes, there were lakes, rivers, grasslands, teeming with wildlife. Archaeological evidence shows hippos in central Algeria, crocodiles in northern Chad, and human settlements scattered across what is now the world's largest desert. This was when the first sub-Saharan populations reached Morocco not as slaves, but as pioneers, walking across a land bridge of grass and water that connected the two halves of Africa. Genetic analysis shows these migrations brought new white chromosome lineages, new mitochondrial DNA signatures, and new cultural practices to North Africa. But here's the paradox that still puzzles scientists. Even during this golden age of African connectivity, the genetic mixing was surprisingly limited. Dr. Sarah Tishkoff, a leading expert on African population genetics, explained this puzzle to me. We see clear evidence of contact, trade, and cultural exchange across the Green Sahara, but the genetic signatures suggest these were distinct populations that maintained their separate identities even while sharing the same landscape. It's as if there were invisible boundaries, not geographic, but social, that kept different populations genetically distinct, even in a paradise built for mixing. Perhaps it was language barriers, or cultural practices, or simply the human tendency to marry within familiar groups. Whatever the cause, it created a pattern of connection without assimilation that would characterize Saharan relationships for millennia. When the Sahara began its transformation back into desert around 5,000 years ago, these ancient connections became fossilized in Moroccan DNA. Today, geneticists can still detect these pre-Islamic, pre-Arab sub-Saharan lineages, like genetic echoes from a lost green world. But the story doesn't end there. The medieval trans-Saharan trade routes, including the horrific slave trade, added newer layers of sub-Saharan ancestry to Morocco. Unlike the ancient migrations, these later additions often came through forced displacement and exploitation, a darker chapter that modern DNA can distinguish from the earlier, voluntary movements. The result is that modern Moroccan DNA carries at least two distinct sub-Saharan signatures, ancient lineages from the Green Sahara period, representing voluntary migration and cultural exchange, and more recent lineages from the slave trade period, representing forced displacement and human suffering. Both are part of Morocco's genetic story, but they tell very different tales about human contact across Africa. I was so focused on these three great continental connections, Europe, the Middle East, and sub-Saharan Africa, that I almost missed the most incredible discovery of all, a connection so unexpected, so seemingly impossible, that when I first heard about it, I thought there had to be a mistake in the data. Hidden in the mitochondrial DNA of Morocco's Amazigh people is a single, ancient maternal lineage known as U5B1b. At first glance, it seems unremarkable, just another genetic marker in the complex soup of North African ancestry. But U5B1b isn't found anywhere else in Africa. It's not found in the Middle East. It's not found in most of Europe. It's found in one other place on Earth, among the Sami reindeer herders of the Arctic Circle. It's in the frozen wilderness of northern Scandinavia and Finland. Think about this for a moment. The Amazigh people of the Atlas Mountains and the Sami people of Lapland have no shared history, no shared language, no contact of any kind for thousands of years. One group herds camels in the desert, the other follows reindeer across the tundra. They live on opposite ends of Europe and Africa, in completely different ecosystems, with completely different cultures. And yet their DNA whispers the story of a single ancient mother. The answer to this genetic riddle lies in one of the most dramatic periods in human history. The last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago. During this frozen apocalypse, ice sheets extended from Scandinavia to northern Germany, from the Alps to the Pyrenees. Most of Europe was uninhabitable, but a small population of humans survived by taking refuge in what geneticists call the Franco-Cantabrian refugium, basically the warmer regions of southern France and northern Spain. These Ice Age survivors, probably numbering only in the thousands, became the ancestors of many modern European populations. Dr. Carl Fox, a paleogeneticist who has spent his career studying Ice Age populations, walked me through the extraordinary discovery when the ice finally retreated around 15,000 years ago. This founding population didn't just expand, it exploded. But instead of moving in predictable directions, they scattered in ways that seem almost random. Some of these Ice Age survivors followed the retreating glaciers north, moving into Scandinavia as the ice melted. They followed reindeer herds into the Arctic, adapting to a life of perpetual winter. Their descendants became the Sami people. But others, and this is the part that still seems impossible, turned south. Instead of following the familiar European coastlines, some of these Ice Age survivors made one of the most audacious journeys in human history. They crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, leaving Europe entirely to settle in North Africa. Their descendants became part of the genetic foundation of the Amazigh people. This isn't just a bridge between neighboring continents. This is a thread of memory stretching 15,000 years back in time, connecting the Sahara to the Arctic, proving that the deep history of Morocco is tied not just to the worlds we know, but to a lost world forged in ice. When I first grasped the implications of this discovery, I had to sit down. Here was genetic proof that some of Morocco's deepest ancestry traces back not to Africa, not to the Middle East, but to Ice Age Europe. It was a connection that predated agriculture, predated civilization, predated everything we think of as recorded history. The Moroccan genetic bridge wasn't just spanning the modern world. It was reaching back to touch the very origins of post-glacial human dispersal. And that was the moment everything clicked into place. I had been approaching this puzzle completely wrong from the beginning. I was searching for separate bridges, trying to measure the distinct influences of different outsiders on a Moroccan core. I was thinking like a traditional historian, looking for invasions and conquests and migrations as separate events that added layers to an existing foundation. But that's not what the DNA tells us at all. The European farmers who crossed from Iberia 7,000 years ago, the culturally Middle Eastern but genetically Mediterranean Phoenicians, the ancient sub-Saharan pioneers from the Green Sahara, the Ice Age wanderers who connected the Arctic to Africa, they weren't just adding to Morocco, they were creating it. Moroccan DNA isn't a pure African core with outside influences layered on top. It is the layers. It is the fusion. Dr. David Reich, whose laboratory has revolutionized our understanding of ancient DNA, put it perfectly when I interviewed him. Morocco represents something we rarely see in human genetics, a place where multiple deep ancestries converge not through recent mixing, but through ancient founding events. It's not that Moroccans are mixed. It's that Morocco was created by mixing. The deep indigenous Ibero-Mauritian root. The massive demographic replacement by Neolithic Europeans. The complex cultural and genetic interchange with Mediterranean civilizations. The ancient pulse from sub-Saharan Africa. The impossible connection to Ice Age Europe. These are unseparate components that you can isolate and study individually. They are the identity itself. The paradox is the point. The complexity isn't a bug in the system. It's the feature that makes Morocco unique in the world. What I initially saw as contradictions in the genetic data: European farmers who replaced but didn't eliminate indigenous populations, Middle Eastern cultures carried by Mediterranean genes, sub-Saharan connections that were both ancient and recent. Arctic lineages in African deserts. These weren't problems to be solved. They were the solution. Morocco is the genetic bridge because it was never just one thing. It was never purely African or European or Middle Eastern. From its deepest foundations, stretching back to the Ice Age itself, it has always been all of them at once. Sweeping visuals of modern Morocco, diverse faces, landscapes, cultures. This is a nation whose very identity was forged at the nexus of three worlds. Place where the hidden map of our blood refuses to obey the neat borders we draw on paper. The story of Morocco isn't the story of a place that was visited by the world. It's the story of a place where the world was made. Its DNA doesn't just connect continents. It holds memories of a time when those continents were more intimately, more mysteriously connected than we ever imagined possible. Ice Age survivors who became Arctic herders and African farmers, Green Sahara migrants who walked between worlds that are now separated by the world's largest desert, Mediterranean seafarers who carried European genes and Middle Eastern dreams to African shores, and that hidden map, the one written in Moroccan bones and carried in Moroccan blood, is still being drawn today. Every child born in Morocco carries forward this impossible. Beautiful complexity, a living reminder that human identity has always been more fluid, more connected, more wonderfully complicated than our simple categories can contain. The genetic bridge of Morocco doesn't just span space, it spans time itself, reaching back to touch the very foundations of human dispersal. And forward to remind us that our future, like our past, will be built by mixing, not by separation. In the end, Morocco's DNA teaches us something profound about what it means to be human. We are all bridges, all of us carrying within ourselves the ancient memories of journeys we never knew we had taken, connections we never knew we had made. The only difference is that Morocco remembers. Thanks for watching.